It's Friday, 5 o'clock, happy hour time, and welcome to our live happy hour WhiskyCast webcast for Friday, April 10th, Good Friday. We've made it through another week, and it's time to relax, pour yourself a dram, and sit back and take part in our conversation with three of the top whiskey blenders in the world. They were joining us from their homes right now. We will bring them in here in just a second. Just a couple of points beforehand. You can always share comments in the chat windows and share comments with each other as well as with our panelists. We will be glad to add those comments in, and you might even see them on the air. And you can ask questions as well. You can also share the links and tell your friends about the show too, and have them join us as well. Let's bring in our panel now. We have Dr. Don Livermore, and joining us from his home in Windsor, Ontario, Billy Leighton from Irish Distillers, joining us from his home in Northern Ireland, and Stephanie Macleod, the master blender for Dewar's and the Dewar's range of single malts, joining us from her home in Scotland. Hope everybody's doing okay tonight. Let's go through, first of all, what you have in your glasses, and we'll start with Stephanie.
I've got the Dewar's Double 32-year-old tonight.
Gee, I wonder why. That sort of won an award just a few days ago, didn't it?
It did. It's funny you mentioned that. Yes, we are very proud to have won the best blended Scotch whisky in the world, no less. So we are all very proud at Dewar's, and all the teams throughout the world, in the US as well. But it's a fantastic dram. So if you have it at home, crack it open and we can enjoy it together.
Billy, what's in your glass?
Well, Mark, I can't leave the side of the newest baby here in the Redbreast family. I've got a glass of Redbreast 27 here, and you know, we just launched it there at the beginning of March, second week in March. We had plans for a big launch event in Portugal, and unfortunately this beast came along and has disrupted all our lives. So we had our events team put together a very short notice, a launch event in Dublin, and the Redbreast 27 has been received very well.
And I should point out that my business partner, our managing director, Christina Filburn, and our youngest daughter, the pride of Redbreast almost. It was the first bottle she bought when she turned 21, was a bottle of Redbreast. 12-year-old Tessa both went over for that one and then spent a few days in Ireland before the pandemic hit. And it took them a few days for them to unpack the bags enough for me to get a chance to taste the sample they brought back, Billy. But when I did, it was stunning. Don, what's in your glass?
Glad to hear it.
Thanks for having me on, Mark, and it's a pleasure to be on and an honor with these two master blenders. Certainly well-awarded guys, Stephanie, Billy. Cheers. We say cheers A in Canada.
Cheers.
Yes. I'm having Cask-Strength Lot 40, where it's we're so proud that this whiskey just won the top Canadian rye whiskey at the World Whiskey Awards this past week, and it's fantastic. It's a great blend. I know everybody always looks for this brand as a classic style of rye whiskey, and cheers.
And we should point out that Billy's Redbreast 21-year-old won the best single pot still whiskey in the World Whiskies Awards as well, which is the same competition where Stephanie's Dewar's Double 32 won. Let's start off with a question for you. And this is one that I think has been asked a number of times, but is whiskey blending an art, a science, or a combination of the two?
For my part, it's a combination of the two. You know, over the years, we have learned so much more about the science of whiskey, and the science goes hand in hand with our noses and our palates, and often we can nose a particular compound in the whiskey and then run it through a gas chromatograph and we can see that peak. But of course, science can't quite take the place of the human nose. And there are many things that we can detect that science still can't. So there's still that mystery about Scotch whisky and why does it taste the way it does? There are thousands of variables that can affect the taste of Scotch whisky. The shape of the stills, the type of malted barley that we use, the cut points, the length of fermentation as well, and also all the different types of casks that we can use to mature our Scotch whisky. So definitely science and art plays a huge part in blending Scotch whisky.
Don, what do you think? You've done a lot of scientific research and have the PhD to back it up. What do you think?
I'm actually in line with what Stephanie says. I'm more getting into the science. I think, as the audience knows, and I got my whiskey wheel in here behind me, we do use the process of looking with the GC mass specs, certainly for a lot of those chemical compounds. But I still believe there are larger compounds that end up in our whiskey that's unmeasurable. If you look at how alcohol will chip away at the lignin or hemicellulose or cellulose in a cask, I think there's some unusual molecules that cannot be measured by a GC mass spec. And I think that's the art that, maybe to add to Stephanie is saying, is those are the things that are measurable. What goes together, what doesn't go together. The other thing I'll add to the discussion as well, I think us for master blenders, it's so important to listen to your customers or your consumers. And I think all of us, we've met each other at whiskey festivals or things of that nature. We ask them, what do you like? What do you see? What do you find interesting? What would what kind of experiments, that kind of thing. And I think that's the other add to it, is talking to our consumer base. And certainly I pay attention and listen to what they have to say.
I want to get into that Canadian whiskey flavor wheel with you in just a minute.
Sure.
But Billy, tell us about what's your take on this?
Yeah, well, up until a certain moment in time, I would have said that the blender is the artist in the show. The distiller is more of the scientist. But that certain moment in time came around whenever I believed, yeah, there's more to the scientific aspect. That moment in time was whenever I read Don's thesis on the what was it, the quantification of wood extracts.
Yeah,
and that is just an amazing reference point. From that you can see where a lot of those flavors, a lot of the aromas, where they actually originate from in the maturation process. So there definitely there is a lot to be said on the scientific aspect of blending. But again, Stephanie said, I would have to agree with her that nothing beats the human senses, the nose and the taste. And that's what it's all about. That's what the consumers are looking for.
We have a question right now from Chris Ratliff. As a blender, do you ever get a cask which just stands out for some reason but doesn't fit into a product lineup? Those are what usually wind up as the single cask bottlings, right?
Yeah, I would say, I'm not sure. Like we do a lot of trials, maturation trials in Midleton at the distillery, and I suppose by definition, doing a cask trial means that it's something that you don't normally do for your brands that you produce. So you're doing a trial and you come up with a trial that works, and you kind of look at yourself and say, well, why did we do that? Because it doesn't fit into anything that we're currently doing, So for us at Irish Distillers, that's where we brought out the Method and Madness brand, and that allows us to play with casks that don't fit into the style of all the other products that we produce.
Stephanie, you've released some exceptional casks from some of the single malt distilleries that are in the Dewar's portfolio. Is this where something like those would fit in?
Yeah, I mean, the title "Exceptional Cask," absolutely no pressure, and it does what it says on the label. The casks have to be exceptional, and what I'm looking for when we come up with a single cask expression of say Aberfeldy, is all the characteristics of Aberfeldy are there, but one particular aspect of it may be heightened by the conditions in which the cask was stored, or indeed the cask itself. So we're almost looking for the character of the single malt, but on steroids. So something that's really pumped up, that's in the style of the whiskey, but giving that little bit extra to our devout whiskey drinkers out there.
Now, I want to turn to this for just a second, because Stephanie is a master blender in Scotland. You have a variety of different distilleries to work with, each with their own character. But Don and Billy, you guys both have one big honking distillery each to work with and create all those different styles in one facility. How does that make it easier or different for you to blend compared to what Stephanie has with each distillery? For instance, Craigellachie has its own house style that's different from Macduff, which is the Deveron or Royal Brackla or Aberfeldy.
If that's questions for me, I would think, I was just counting in my head as you were asking that question, how many distillation units we have at the Hiram Walker Distillery, and we are probably about 9 or 10 different types of distillation units, and that's column distillation, rectification stills. We got 4 different styles of pot stills, and each makes their own style of whiskey. And one of the experiments I've certainly been working on in the last year and a half is we got 4 different styles of pot stills, and that's traditionally what Lot 40 is made from. We've taken the same rye, putting it into different still, and they're totally different. And that's what makes the job fun in terms of a blender. You get to try these distillation units and explain what it is. So we got lots of stuff to play with. If anyone has an opportunity to come to our distillery, I do put on a blending 101 exercise where I'll line up 200 different casks of different distillations or grains, that sort of thing. And it kind of goes into that question you're asking: is there different casks out there and things like that? What paranoids me is most as a blender is probably buying casks from another facility and what was in those casks before. That's where I see probably the most variance in our and that's where you kind of have to move things up and down when you're doing the recipes. So it's a lot of, I mean, we got diversity inside our own walls, and that's kind of how we've set up our business, and it's a fantastic distillery to be able to do that.
Billy, same question to you.
Yeah, well, similar to Don, like the Midleton Distillery can produce, well, it produces both pot still whiskey, Irish pot still whiskey, and Irish grain whiskey. Brian Nation is our master distiller there, and it's down to Brian how we can produce various styles of pot still whiskey in the copper pots. So we have some diversity in-house there as well. As well as that, on the grain side, we have a kind of got a Midleton signature grain, which we use mostly for blending, but then we have some other styles of grain whiskey as well, which give us different flavors, different character, and you know, whenever you're putting all those different styles of distillate into a range of various cask types, then that's where we get the variation from to give us the components that we use for blending.
Stephanie, I know you have a handful of distilleries within the Dewar's portfolio, but I'm assuming you draw on many more than just your company's own distilleries when you're blending Dewar's, right?
Yes. We have 5 distilleries in the Dewar's portfolio. But as it says in our advertising, we can blend up to 40 different malts and grains. So that means that we have to reciprocate with other companies. So that might seem strange to other spirit categories and indeed other types of whiskies that we cooperate at a technical level with rival companies in the marketplace. And it's in all of our interests to make the best whiskey that we possibly can. And we often come together at the Scotch Whisky Research Institute and discuss technical things, maturation, distillation, the types of barley and the varieties of barley that we're using. And obviously, when it comes to the sales and in the marketplace, fierce competitors, but at the technical level, we share our knowledge of what we do. So yes, we reciprocate the malts and the grain that we need to create the consistency of our Dewar's blended Scotch portfolio.
We have a question from Bert Doyle that really applies specifically to you, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Scottish distilleries are rated with a thing called a WB ranking. What is a WB ranking as I know it that applies to blending?
A WB ranking.
I know there are different ratings for different distilleries in terms of the quality or in terms of the type of type of flavor. There are different rankings, at least among distilleries. I think that's what Bert is referring to here.
I think he's referring to what we call first-class malts, second-class malts. So what we mean by that is the malts that get on with other malts. So Altmore is considered to be a first-class malt, and that means that although it's a superb single malt whiskey, in a blend, it's very amiable. It gets on with the other malt whiskies that are in the blend, and it adds something special, green floral notes to the blend, and so it's very sought after by other blenders. So I think that's what you're referring to.
And Bert points out in a later comment that it's shown on whiskybase.com, which is one of these websites that has a lot of different whiskeys and the provenances of them. And I'm not sure, that might be an internal ranking or an internal rating or something that WhiskyBase has. Yeah. Our friend Ian Logan from your colleagues at Chivas Brothers. Great point, Stephanie. Each company benefits each other.
Very much so. Yeah.
And we also have a comment from some whiskey bloke, and this would apply to all of you. What's the traceability like in those casks you buy? How often are you unsure of the previous content? I would imagine that if you and your colleagues are buying casks, you probably have a pretty good idea what went into them before and the provenance of those casks, right?
I don't know if that question's because I kind of made the comment before. The largest thing I'm unsure of is the cask. So we do buy a fair number of bourbon casks from facilities, and how we mitigate our risk is we buy from a number of bourbon distilleries to try to blend it out in our larger batches kind of things. Where it becomes dicey is when you get smaller and smaller case runs of things. That's where the differences come into play. And the other comment I'll make on that is when I was doing my PhD with here at Watt University with brewing and distilling, I was looking at methodology using infrared sensors to measure the inside of a cask for all those components that we measure rapidly. So when I buy a cask from somebody, I know how much of the wood components it'll give me after 3 years of aging, and you can do that measurement in about 30 seconds. Now, it's a PhD. It was all theoretical. They did it on a benchtop. I have to find a fiber optics company to be able to bring it to life. But that is the challenge to a blender is certainly reliability of the casks and the people you're from. And the last thing I'll say to it as well, and it might be a little bit more difficult for the other two here. We are within driving distance of Kentucky, so it's a 6-hour drive. We can get fresh casks and they don't dry out, and I think that's one of the biggest risks is the cask drying out when you receive them. And we get them whole intact, and we fill them up as soon as we can.
Billy, you and I have been together in Jerez, Spain, when the Lustau edition Redbreast was launched a few years ago. And I know you spend a lot of time down there at the Paez cooperage getting your sherry barrels. How do you make sure they don't get dried out on that trip from Spain after they've been seasoned all the way up to Midleton?
Yeah, well, it's that's a good point, Mark. Because there always will be, once we have them emptied. Say first of all that the sherry casks that we procure are bespoke casks. So we have them made for us and seasoned for us. So we pretty much have control of the quality effectively right from the forest through the sawmill to the cooperage, to the seasoning of the casks, right to their delivery in Midleton. Now, once the wine has been emptied from the casks, it's quite low in strength, and it has the potential to spoil in transit. So we only move those casks in the winter months. So starting maybe October through to March. Unfortunately, some of them have got caught on the wrong side of this virus, and we're waiting for the last of them to be delivered for this season. But it's very important that we pay as much attention as we do to the quality, because a lot of those sherry casks are put away, and once they're filled, we won't look at them again for probably at least 12 years. You know, and 12 years is a long time to depend on a cask that you're not sure how it's performing. So the time and the time and the effort that we put into the quality up front then gives us as blenders the kind of the reassurance that we know in 12 years' time what we can expect from those casks.
Stephanie, your thoughts?
Yes, we use casks from Kentucky, ex-bourbon casks. We use casks from Jerez, sherry casks. And, you know, we always insist that the bungs are in the casks, so they're nice and fresh when they arrive. And then when they do arrive on our site, especially for the sherry, you know, we go up, we take the bungs out, and we nose all of the casks, because sometimes with sherry, you know, as Billy was saying, you know, sometimes there can be off notes just due to maybe heat during transit. Thankfully, there's not too many, because they are very expensive individually. So we like to make sure that everything is okay by nosing all of the casks, so there's no, you know, unpleasant surprises later down the line. But if we're using a cask perhaps for the first time, excuse me, we like to monitor its progress. So every week, every month, depending on the cask, we'll sample it and assess it, make observations on the colour, and note all these observations down, so we can then use that information when we go to use those casks again.
Let's take a quick break here. I want to give you guys each a chance to talk about the whiskeys in your glass. We did have a question about what I'm drinking, and since all three of you are my friends and I didn't want to play any favorites tonight, I stayed neutral. I've got a Westland American single malt in my glass because I didn't want to have to try to pick any favorites tonight. So just for the record, that's what I am drinking. But Stephanie, let's start with you. Tell us about the 32 Double Double.
Okay. Well, Double Double started as a challenge from our brand team. And they wanted me to create the smoothest whiskey ever. And I don't know if you're all aware, but at Dewar's, we talk about double aging. So that's when we bring the blend together, the malts and the grains, to create our blended Scotch whiskey. And at that stage, we could send it for bottling. But at Dewar's, what we do is we take the blend and we put it back into specially selected oak casks, and we put it back into the warehouse for a period of time. So it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of casks. It takes up space in the warehouse, but we absolutely utterly believe that it makes our whiskey smoother. Now, we can't prove it scientifically, unfortunately, but on the palate, when we compare single-aged with double-aged or unmarried and married, that's the kind of the traditional term that we use for this process, we really can perceive the difference. So double was taking that process and extending it out. So the first part of the process, we blended the malts together and we blended the grains together. And then we took the blended malt and the blended grain, put them into specially selected oak casks and sent them back to the warehouse for 1 month. Then we brought them out again, brought them together as a blended Scotch whiskey, put them back into casks, sent them to the warehouse. After a month, we brought them back. And then at that stage, the 21-year-old went into Oloroso sherry casks. The 27-year-old went into Palo Cortado sherry casks. And the 32-year-old went into Pedro Jimenez sherry casks. And then we let them sit, we sampled, and then we decided when was the optimum time to take them out and then send them off for bottling. So Double 32 is 46% alcohol, and it's natural color and non-chill filtered. So the PX really has an influence on this whiskey. Now, it's very important to point out that when we're finishing whiskey in a cask, we don't want the cask to dominate the core flavor of the whiskey. We want it to complement it. And what I was trying to achieve with the double range was that each age was to represent a different facet of the Dewar's house style. So the 21-year-old was reflecting the classic fruity toffee notes. The 27-year-old
Okay, we're having a little bit of problems with Stephanie's connection here, so we're going to give it a second here and see if the connection comes back. Stephanie, you there?
The citrus notes
okay.
of
we're going to let Stephanie reconnect. There we go. Okay, now you're back in. So we lost you for a second there, so please continue.
Yeah, so I think I was on to Dewar's 32. So we finished that in PX, and the 32-year-old was representing that kind of smoky style, the smoky finish that we get at the end of all of the Dewar's portfolio. So let's have a nose. If any of you have it at home, then please feel free to join me and tell me what you're getting. So we get these lovely ripe raisin aromas coming through. Really beautiful and luxurious and notes of cinnamon coming through as well. And if we add a little bit of water. Now, I know the camps are divided about should we add water or should we not add water. Completely up to you. You know, enjoy whiskey the way you enjoy it and not how you think you should be enjoying Scotch whiskey. If you want to put a cube of ice in it or a whole tumbler full, then be my guest. If you want to mix it in a cocktail, again, please do what you want to do, because whiskey is made to be enjoyed. It's not a rite of passage. It's not some sort of ritual. It's, you know, we made it for people to enjoy it. And now more than ever, we need to find comfort in really good things, good food, spending time with your family, and also great whiskies as well. Yeah.
No arguments there. We did have a comment from Richard Dankovic, and I hope I'm getting that right. Hashtag bottle kill. Finishing up my bottle of Redbreast 21 and then on to the Redbreast 27, hopefully before the show ends.
Ooh.
Billy, let's talk about that Redbreast 27.
Good man, Richard. Yeah.
Tell us what you were thinking when you created this one.
Well, where the Redbreast 27 started with was, we were looking at taking the profile of Redbreast up to another level. And how were we going to do this? It was a difficult one because we already had Redbreast 21, and Redbreast 21 is a beautiful whiskey, wins lots of awards. I kind of feel sorry for it now because Redbreast 27 is going to start winning those awards. But where it came from was taking the Redbreast style and what could we do to tweak it a little bit. So with Redbreast 27, I mean, it wasn't just a matter of taking Redbreast 21 and letting it age for another 6 years. It had to be different. The risky thing for me was whenever we started to consider the use of the port season casks. Up until Redbreast 27, it had always been Redbreast is a mix of ex-bourbon casks and ex-Oloroso sherry casks. So I was very conscious of, we have a lot of loyal Redbreast consumers out there, and how would they react to the use of some port in the mix? But we tried it anyway. We did numerous prototypes, and we eventually ended up where we are with this one. But I think I have to say here that the Redbreast, the port component in the Redbreast 27 is actually 28 years old. So it's really down to our predecessors. We're going to have to step back a generation and thank the people that were out there speculating and buying casks that really there was no home for in those days. In fact, Irish whiskey wasn't in a great place. So it's thanks to those guys that that procured those casks on a trial basis, and those casks aged and were available today for us to take the credit for something like Redbreast 27. So what the port does, first of all, we look at the color. It's that rich, dark, almost mahogany color. What the port does on top of the style of, say, Redbreast 21, it just adds another layer of the fruit succulence in there. So you've got the distinct Midleton Irish pot still spicy character in the body, but you've got also the dried fruits, the raisins, sultanas, figs, that come along with the Oloroso seasoned casks. But then you have the succulence of the ripe, juicy plums, stone fruit, black cherries, all of that infused with the other fruits there, and really, this is one that you could nose it all night without even taking a sip of it. It's so sumptuous on the nose. But I'm going to have a sip.
About time.
Bottled at Cask-Strength. Okay, so 54.6. And I haven't added any water to this. And you see, my eyes aren't watering. I'm not coughing or spluttering. It's very smooth. And and the length of it, there's such a long finish, and it's those fruits, a little bit of the pot still spice, and the mix of the American and we'll say the Iberian oak in there just lasts forever.
Now, we had a quick question from Matt Kelleher about this one. Is the 28-year-old port component connected to the Method and Madness 28-year-old Ruby port? Is this the same juice, or is this a cousin? What is it?
Yeah, Matt, that's a very good question. In fact, if we go back further to if anybody remembers Jameson Rarest Vintage Reserve, there was a component in there. The Rarest Vintage Reserve was discontinued, and that was the original home for these port casks. And in sampling and going through the cask, the Method Madness 28-year-old was a cask that stood out for us. So we bottled that as a single cask. So the port component that we have in the Redbreast 27 would be from a similar parcel of casks to the Method Madness port cask. Yeah.
Let's move over to Don now. We have a question before you tell us about the Lot 40 Cask-Strength from Tyrone Cote with the club in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Have you ever thought about doing a peated Northern Borders collection whiskey, Don?
All the time. All the time, yeah. Stay tuned. Those are things that I'm working on, and if you ever get a chance to visit me from Halifax to the Blending 101 that I put on, and if you see it on my Instagram at CDN Whiskey Doc or my Twitter feed or LinkedIn, it's extraordinary. And that's one of the samples that I'll put out is our rye whiskies that are aged in those peated. It's just not quite ready to come out into play yet, if a lack of a better term. So working on it. I hear you. I hear consumers wanting that on a Canadian whiskey style. So what I have in front of me today is Lot 40. The history of Lot 40, it's a much younger brand than my other two colleagues here. Lot 40 started out in 1998 in Canada. It was developed by the previous master blender, a gentleman by the name of Mike Booth. And Mike at the time wanted to release, I was a young blender at the time, and Mike wanted to release a rye whiskey in 1998, a premium style of Canadian whiskey. And it was excellent whiskey, but at that time, Canadians just were not ready for premium Canadian whiskey. They were going through that single malt Scotch phase and then getting into their Irish whiskey phase. But there was an underling of people and followers out there that really loved the brand Lot 40 and just kept asking us, can you bring Lot 40 back? Can you bring Lot 40 back? So we did in 2012, and I made a change to what Mike had originally developed. I switched it over to brand new virgin oak casks. So those American white oak casks. So that was one change we did. It was well received in the public at the time, and it got some notoriety. And in the next following years, we did another scale change to the brand Lot 40 as we actually took out the malted rye. We were finding that the rye we were getting in from suppliers had an interesting cauliflower note that was bringing into the whiskey, and that's dimethyl sulfide. It can be an issue when you're malting rye. So we pulled it out and we went over to the unmalted rye version of that. And lo and behold, the brand Lot 40 kept winning the Canadian Whiskey of the Year. And what we're looking for with this core whiskey is it's 100% rye. It's Canadian whiskey. For those who don't know out there, we generally ferment things separately. We ferment corn separately, rye separately, barley, wheat separately, distill them separately, and then we put them together at the end. And so this is our rye flavoring whiskey. But the one difference with this whiskey, and if you were to compare against the straight rye category in the United States, is we do column distill it, just like a straight rye would normally be done. But after the column distillation, we then throw it into a pot still, and the pot still in itself has a really steep line arm on it. So it's quite the degree down. I know, Mark, you've had an opportunity to see it. What that does, it makes a big, bold, less reflux in your pot still. And what we're trying to find is that spicy characteristic. So when we column distill the liquid, comes out about 70% alcohol, put it into that pot still, do a heads and tails cut, and the heads give you that green grass, some of that herbal notes. We pull them out, let the pot still go on, and you get your fruity flavors, and then your floral flavors comes out next, and then after that is your spicy rye flavors. Once after about 12 hours of boiling, we stop the still at that point because we want to eliminate that soapy content that you'd find in the tails. So what we're really trying to do with Lot 40 is dial up the rye component to it, and we're looking for this guy here. This is my molecular science. That's 4-ethyl glycol, and that's why we want the lava. So it ends up being big, bold, and spicy, and people are loving that. And so much so is this, we've actually went to a very unique hybrid of rye that we now get our farmers to contract grow for us. It's called Bracetto rye, which dials up that spicy note even more. So that's the third change we've done to the brand Lot 40. So again, listening to the public, 2 or 3 years ago, we released our first release of a Cask-Strength Lot 40. At that time, it was a 12-year-old whiskey, did quite well. People loved it. The following year, didn't have a lot of inventory of it, so we released 11-year, and people were again loves the brand. And then this is the third release of it, which just won the Canadian Whiskey of the Year at the World Whisky Awards. And this one, we did a little bit of a twist to it, where we've aged it in French oak casks, which typically you don't see in the Canadian whiskey category. So we're new to that. I know the other two probably see French oak casks all the time. In Canada, they're hard to find. They're very expensive. So what I was looking to do is get that. And I know it's kind of cheesy to say it, but I find the French oak cask gives you that nice French vanilla note to your whiskey. We wanted to balance against the heavier rye spice. And when I do that blending exercise with my people, and I line them all up, this is the most popular ingredient. This is what people go to, is the French oak Lot 40 Egypt. So we decided to bottle it. I mean, people, why don't you bottle this stuff? And so we did it for this year. We put in away around about 59% alcohol. In Canada, we do lose strength with aging. So this one landed at 57.0 as a cask strength, and you got the heavy, beautiful, spicy rye notes that now balance with the French vanilla, and it's an excellent whiskey, and we're certainly very proud of this one. Cheers.
Great. Thank you for sharing that one with us. And we will bring everybody back in here now. I have a good question for you from Scotchology. For all three of you, if you could travel back in time to when you were first starting out in the industry, what advice would you give yourself? And we'll start with Stephanie.
What advice would I have given?
Besides run fast.
Yeah, when I started out in the industry, there were very few female blenders. So I never actually thought that I would become a blender, actually. But I just loved, when I started at the University of Strathclyde and started studying whiskey, I didn't even think I liked whiskey. I knew nothing about it. But as soon as I discovered, only 3 ingredients, we all use roughly the same types of techniques when we're making our whiskey, but 2 distilleries sitting side by side can produce completely different flavor profiles. And that just drew me in to working with Scotch whiskey. So, I've got so much out of the whiskey industry, and I've met so many amazing people. And I guess I would tell myself, just enjoy every moment of it and absorb the wisdom of colleagues within Bacardi and out with Bacardi as well. I mean, I've heard some great things tonight even. So yeah, that's what I would tell myself: enjoy and absorb everything that you can.
Don?
I think I would tell myself a couple of things. One of the things is tone down the science a little bit. I think there is an art to the whiskey making process, and I really think when I first started, it was this, everything can be analyzed to death, can be death to death, and I don't think that's the case. So I think the advice I would give myself is, when I do it today, and I mentioned it earlier, is talk to your consumers, talk to the people inside your company. I know we're the figurehead of our brands, but we're only as good as the guy buying the grain, or the procures the grain, that analyzes grain, to quality control, to the distiller, even to the marketing and sales. It's a team to make whiskey, and I think listening to everybody along the way is very, very important. And I think that's the advice I would certainly give myself is everybody's got a stake in it. Listen to them, and those are the ideas that finally get to the final product you're making.
Billy?
Yeah, that's a difficult question for me, because whenever I get into the whiskey business, I was a trainee accountant, and from an accountant's point of view, everything has to be down to the last cent. Whenever you get into whiskey production, there's a lot more. There's a lot more of a gut feeling involved, that everything doesn't have to be down to the last mark. So yeah, if I have kind of learned anything over the years, it would be to listen, go with your head, and don't be tied down to any rules.
Great advice. Now we have a question that applies, well, it really applies to Don, but it really applies to all three of you. Dr. Don, you have to come to Fredericton for the New Brunswick Spirits Festival in November. And I'm going to agree with Stephen on this one. We need to get you to Fredericton, because this is their 25th year. If the festival goes off in November, as we all hope it will, it's their 25th year, and you need to get out for that one. But the question I have is, how do you decide how much time you spend on the road at events? Stephanie, you get off a little easier on this, because I know the Dewar's folks don't ask you to travel nearly as much as Billy and Don have to, but how much input do you have into your travel schedules and which events you go to?
To answer the Fredericton question, every year that one comes up and it conflicts with the Germany for us. So I know that's a key market that we want to have some key whiskeys. So I hear you. I will try to get to Fredericton, but I get that all over the place, wherever. Why can't you come here? And there's so many whiskey festivals, as the other two probably realize. It's tough to get to them all. So to lead into your second question, I decide my own schedule, where I want to go, where we want to look for our brands, where we need help, and try to get a rotation of different festivals to go into. Maybe the current times, things are going to change. I think you're starting to see things digitally. Maybe there's opportunity to get information out to everybody across the world, across a platform like this one, Mark. But again, I do find it valuable to go out to those festivals. I'm researching when I'm going there, because that's the chance I get to talk to everybody, what people are drinking. And so it's tough. I try to balance it the best we can. But I think it's important to tell the good things that come from Canada, to be honest with you.
Stephanie, how much input do you have into your travel plans?
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky. I do have quite a lot of freedom to choose. But I certainly have been spending a lot of time in the States recently. And very recently, in fact, in February, I was there or March actually, for the launch of Dewar's Illegal Smooth. So that was really exciting, and I'm so glad that we decided to do that launch with the media early, because it was really, maybe 2 weeks after I got home that we were then on lockdown. So Dewar's Illegal Smooth was where we finished Dewar's 8-year-old in mezcal casks. So it's been very well received. It really spent just a very short time in these casks. But yeah, I love going out into the markets and meeting consumers, because the consumers are king. and they tell me what they like and what they want to see in the future. And I just love seeing how consumers around the world drink our whiskey. And I remember going to China for the first time many years ago, and I saw them that they had Dewar's 12 in a jug, in a pitcher with lots of ice. And I thought, oh my goodness, what on earth are they doing? But then I thought, well, that is how they enjoy drinking Dewar's 12. And so I get a lot of inspiration actually from travel and visiting the different markets, and again, just talking to people and listening to what they want.
And Greg in Paris in France says, we need to see Stephanie at Whisky Live Paris this year, please. Billy,
nice.
I've seen you at Whisky Live Paris before. How much control did you get over your schedule? I know that last month you were supposed to be in New York when the lockdown hit and wound up having to cancel on short notice with Dave McCabe to do a tasting for the 27-year-old. And how much control do you get over your schedule?
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose I probably have total control over it, if truth be told. But by the same token, you could be on the road all the time, So you have to be, you have to have some sense of the reason for your travel. But to be honest, I really enjoy going to. I mean, Greg was talking about Whisky Live Paris there, Mark, and what amazes me when you go to those shows, like there are Redbreast fans everywhere, and people will come along, and people that you see probably more regularly than you would see some of your friends at home. They're there, they come along each year, they just want to ask questions, and as Don says, you've got to listen to your consumers, and that's where I'd say that's where your future is, really, listening to your consumers. But having said that, yeah, I mean, we missed out on a nice trip to the States in March with the Redbreast 27. But we have great ambassadors in the States as well. You've got Dominic Venegas over in the West Coast, Alex Thibault on the East Coast. Those guys do a great job for us as well.
We have a question that sort of fits into what Stephanie was talking about with the illegal cask, the mezcal cask. Could you share your opinions on exotic casks that are permitted and used lately, like tequila, sojo, and stout? And might those casks have play a part in future blended whiskeys? Obviously, Stephanie, you've seen that with the last two of your Dewar's releases with the rum and the mezcal casks. Billy's been doing some stuff with Jameson, with the CaskMates, with stout casks. And Don, I'm not sure where you are on this one yet, but let's get some thoughts. If we're going to open up the world of cask finishes to some of these more exotic casks, do we go too far? How far is too far? Let's put it that way. And Stephanie, I'll start with you.
Yeah. Well, it was well publicized that the Scotch Whisky Association relaxed the rules on the types of casks that we could use. So what they said was that provided that the spirit is traditionally matured in oak casks, then we can use it to finish and mature our Scotch whisky. However, the caveat is that it still must retain the traditional flavour of Scotch whisky. And so when I was looking at the mezcal casks, and we're very lucky to have partnered with Illegal because they have a beautiful fresh mezcal, and it really complements well with the Scotch whisky. But I did only keep it in for just under a month because I just didn't want the mezcal to overpower the character of the Dewar's 8-year-old. So it is very important that, and as I said before, when we're doing any finishing, whether it's a sherry cask or a red wine cask, it's really important to retain the character of the Scotch whisky. Otherwise, you could just be drinking a sherry or a red wine. So balance and ensuring that the flavour of the Scotch whisky shines through is very important to us.
Don, for you, an exotic cask is a Scotch whiskey cask, and you've been doing some of those recently in the Northern Border Collection Rare series.
Yeah, we've for Canadian whiskey, we've been playing with different casks for a long time. There hasn't been that restriction in place that I think Stephanie has seen. There's people in the Canadian whiskey that has mezcal. I've got experiments in tequila casks for many years at this point. I'm not quite convinced personally with it, but again, I'm not making whiskey for myself. I'm making whiskey for consumers, and the people that I find that like those ones in the tequila cask tend to be the bartenders. That's where they can get quite creative and mixing it, and they put it into your traditional tequila style of drinks is what I find they do with it. Again, I'm all for the cask finishing. I think it is a hot topic right now. I think we'll see it in our industry probably for the next 10 years maybe or so. I think us as master blenders need to probably put away inventories of different casks of things for the next group behind us to be able to work with. I think that's our responsibility. So that's what the efforts I've been doing with now. My thing is what's next when the cask finishing things get tired, and that's where my head is at actually today, is where are people going to be going in 10 years that we got to be putting into a barrel today. And I think people are getting more educated around whiskey. They understand the finishing, they get the flavors that come into it, which can be quite incredible when you get into the blending side. But I think the next obvious thing people will look at is grain. I think grain is a thing. You drive in your car, you see the wheat fields or the rye fields or corn fields, wherever you may be. And I think people will get it. They understand it. So those are the questions I'm starting to get asked by your higher end consumers, especially malts, the types of malts people are looking at. My dream someday, I don't know if I'll get to be as people will start talking about yeast. And I don't see a whole lot of it. If I sat at the corner bar with somebody on a bar stool and start talking about yeast, it's a turnoff to people, I find. But quite honestly, I think it adds the most flavor to our products. I think there's some incredible things that can be done with yeast. And again, cask finishing, we've been doing it, but again, my mind is now what's next, to be honest with you.
And Billy, let's talk about the CaskMate from Jameson, because that was one you guys came up with down in Midleton and didn't even tell the marketing guys about until it was ready.
That's really a fact. Yeah. Well, I mean that was something that happened. It could just as easily never have happened, But we did some trials. A local craft brewery in Cork asked to borrow some cask for us, which we were happy enough to do. And whenever they had kept their beer, and those stout was the first one. Whenever they had kept their stout in the cask for as long as they wanted it, they came back to us and said, "Look, we have these casks. They're empty now. What will we do with them?" So we just said, "Send them back." So they sent it back, and we looked at each other and said, "Look at these casks. They've had stout in them. So what will we do?" And just for the hell of it, we filled them with Jameson, and it's something that worked. And then somehow or other, the marketing department got wind of this and became very interested. And from an initial pilot bottling of Jameson CaskMates, there was about 3,000 bottles, I think, that were sold locally in the Cork area. We could be, I think we could be in the region of around about 300,000 cases just now. So that was a huge success as far as cask finishing was concerned. So that gave us the beer angle. So we've followed the stout up with an IPA version. But just going back to Stephanie's point about the relaxation of the Scotch whisky regulations, the Irish whisky regulations were a bit more relaxed to start with. Okay, so rather than specifying oak casks, they specified wooden casks such as oak. So we tried various different woods as well. I think the most successful so far has been the chestnut casks. And again, as I said earlier, that finishing whiskey in chestnut doesn't fit into any of our other brand formulations. So that fell neatly into the Method and Madness brand. So on the strength of the success of the chestnut, we've also put out some acacia. That I think that's currently only available in the Celtic Whisky Shop, and some cherry as well. Some whiskey finished in cherry. Now the cherry was a bit of a challenge, but we got it to a point where we were happy to put it out there under the Method and Madness banner. So there's lots of opportunity there as in the Irish category, still for innovation. And it's all about innovation. Innovation is the future of the business.
We had a great comment now from Liam Sparks. Never tell the marketeer what you've got in the warehouse. I think that's the blender's motto.
Yeah,
I can agree with that, Liam.
Never. I can add to that. Never tell Liam Sparks what you've got in the warehouse.
So that brings up a great point here. When it comes to new product development, how much freedom do you get? Does the marketing department tell you, okay, we need something that's going to hit these 5 demographic targets? What do you got? Or do you get to play around to come up with a great blend or a great idea and take it to marketing and say, we've got this. You guys are going to look so good to the executive suite when you market this stuff.
I don't know who that is. The director. Want me to answer that first? Yeah, sure. Probably about 90% of what I do, it's me playing around with it, and about 10% marketing. I think there's always opportunity to look at just new ways, new things. Like I said, hearing consumers talk about the things they want to see. And if I hear more and more, chances are I'll do it. I'll put it away. Like I said, I think our responsibility as blenders is putting away things today for the next blenders to be able to use. And I think there's been some great innovations just going out there and talking to them. So I think that's our job. Is you're here research and development, and you're playing and doing things, and certainly within reason. But I think that's our job.
Stephanie?
Yeah, I mean, our brand teams are the people that I talk to most. I have to say, and it's a combination of the two. So our brand teams represent the voice of our consumers. And so if they hear something or something that sounds interesting, they'll tell me about it, and then I'll see what I can do and come up with something. And also, we maybe see some interesting casks we've never used before, put the whiskey in it, do a little trial, and then we'll tell the marketing people about it. But yeah, it's a combination of the two. You can't work in isolation. I know that the master blender's role is often perceived as being this solitary figure, but it is very much about a whole team. So not just an operations team, but also a brand team, and our finance guys as well, play a big part in that too. And we all come together as one team, because it takes a team to launch a new product.
Billy?
Yeah, pretty much similar to Stephanie there. I mean, we are always having trials going on in the background that probably marketing don't know about. Some of them they never find out about.
They know
Those are the
now.
ones that don't work, of course. But you know, generally we would be driven by marketing as far as new products and innovation is concerned. Like the Redbreast 27, that came about from, you know, from marketing. We want to extend the Redbreast family in an upward direction, you know, and but then it's handed over to you to decide how to do it, you know. So for us, all the markers are there. If it's a new Redbreast, then we know the style is going to be ex-bourbon casks with fortified wine casks, you know, and so it's important whenever you're producing, you know, like we have Jameson, we have Powers, we have the Midletons, Method and Madness, the Spot range, and they all have their own particular style. So whenever marketing come to us to say we want to produce a new Powers, for example, then we know we have the clues there already as to what kind of direction we can take it to maintain that style. So there is a little bit of you know, it's always working two ways, you know. So we're working with marketing, and marketing then are working with production, and that's how it works. That's how we go forward.
We have a good question from Darren Friel. How much of a master blender's working day is spent actually drinking or tasting whiskey? How much time do you spend on an average day actually tasting samples? John, go ahead.
You want me to go? Not a whole lot. It's probably most of the day when it gets to samples. I think, like Stephanie said, you're dealing with marketing more than anything else in a day. But we can nose things quite easily, and I can understand what it's going to taste like. So I got a team of people that do a lot of the day-to-day nosing, smelling. It's probably, again, I think the comment was made earlier, you can have all the GCs in the world. Smelling and tasting whiskey is the most important test that we do. The sensory work is the most important test. But for me personally, myself, not a lot in a day. I know I could do a lot of our blending, talking to our blenders by the phone. I do recognize a lot of our spirits, what's going on. And I think if we're working on a project brief from the marketers as a whiskey, once we get probably to the final end, not maybe the point that we get into the tasting of what we're doing. So nosing is the majority of what we do, and for us at least at what we do. And probably at the end of a day, at the end of a project, that's where the tasting will come into play for us.
Stephanie?
Yeah, I do spend a lot of my day in meetings, but I do spend a lot of time nosing, mostly nosing actually, rather than tasting, because the nose recovers much more quickly than the palate. So yeah, I mean, we're assessing it at each stage of the process. So we receive samples from the distilleries, and not just our own distilleries, but our reciprocal distilleries. And we're really just making sure that later down the line, there aren't anything that we weren't expecting. And then we know sometimes during the maturation process, when a new blend is created, we'll nose again then. And it's not just me that noses. We have a team of trained panelists from throughout the business and in our distilleries and in our blend centres. And they're kind of the first line of defence. And, you know, they will feed back anything that they're picking up, because the guys in the distilleries, it's not really just about nosing the spirit. They can detect a change in the process in the air. So we really do rely on, you know, the professionalism and the passion of our distillery workers. So yeah, nosing and to a lesser extent tasting plays an important part in my role.
Billy?
Yeah, I was just checking my diary there. The last time I was in the lab in Midleton was the 12th of March. So I haven't done a lot of nosing or tasting over the past 4 weeks. But in normal times, I wouldn't spend a lot of my time nosing or tasting. Now, having said that, I just received a parcel of samples at home yesterday from the lab. But I have a great guy, Dave McCabe, working with me. He's closer to base than I am. I'm actually about 310 miles away from Midleton just now, so I'm socially distancing from my colleagues in Midleton big time. But as well as the tasting that goes on in the lab, we again would have a panel of a trained panel of tasters that are looking at all the day-to-day cask samples, bulk movements, tanker dispatches, things like that. Yeah.
Okay, that brings up a great point. You mentioned Dave McCabe. We had a question about him earlier. Somebody saying, "Gee, Billy, where's Dave, and what's he doing right now?" Now the question is address this one to Stephanie and Don, because we know Dave is Billy's apprentice in terms of being their master blender for Irish Distillers. They've openly said so. That's part of the whole Method and Madness program with the masters and their apprentices. But what do you two have in place to train your successors down the road? And Stephanie, we'll start with you.
Yeah, Bacardi have the next generation blending club. So each of the master blenders has an apprentice, for want of a better word, an assistant blender. And mine is Kirsty Hodge, and I think she might be watching. And so it's very, whiskey is all about laying down a legacy and building for the future. And it's a bit like, the spirit that we make today, will we actually see it in the bottle? Because, it could be out there for, 40 years in our warehouses. So a bit like that, we have to lay down a legacy of the next generation of blenders coming through, because people come and go, but the whiskey, the recipes, the traditions live on, and we have to pass those on to the next generation. So something that we are really passionate about at Bacardi.
Don?
Yeah, so my right-hand man would be a gentleman by the name of Scott Stay. He's probably one of the best blenders in the world, in my mind. I know you've had a chance to visit our distillery. We don't only make whiskey here. We make rum, and we make gin, and we make liqueurs of that nature. So, and RTDs. And Scott certainly is well versed in all of those areas. And I can't say enough about him. I mean, he's an excellent blender. He's already in place. He helps us make decisions day to day, certainly on what's going on. And then we have a young lady we just hired in the last year. Natalie Gabrielle is her name. She's 1 year into the job, but there's potential for her to learn the traditions, just like Stephanie had mentioned. That's many years away, but I mean, there is a spread of people that we put into place, and to understand what Canadian whiskey is all about. So the blender job is kind of keeping everybody connected and together, and there's lots of things going on, and I'm very comfortable we will be in capable hands.
We have a great question from Kent Huff. I wish my nose was that good. I have just started on developing my nose in the last couple of years, and that's more of a comment than a question. But it brings up a good question. How can the folks who are watching develop their noses? How did you develop yours? And we'll start with Billy on this one.
It's quite simple, Mark. I mean, I didn't, by any stretch of the imagination, feel that I had any particular good sense of taste or smell. But back in the days, Old Bush Mills was part of the Irish Distillers group back whenever I was an accountant there, and I became part of their tasting panel, and that's probably where the interest stemmed from. But that grew just through experience. So it's not just a matter of smelling whiskey and what can you find, what aromas do you get in your whiskey. Just smell everything around you, smell apples, smell, like I'm in the kitchen at the minute. If you don't believe me, like there's the tomato ketchup, smell tomato ketchup. What do you get there? Everything that's around you, leaves, plants, flowers, everything, and you're smelling it. And those smells get locked into your memory. And I think that's where you need to start. Just recognize smells, and once they're in there, you'll always remember them. So if you pick up a glass of whiskey and say, "Oh yeah, I'm getting raisins in there," that's coming from somewhere. Now, everybody may not get that smell of raisins, or they might get that smell but not call it raisins. But they'll get the smell and call it what they remember, what they have locked into their memory. And it's just by, for me anyway, it's just by doing that that you can develop the confidence to describe your whiskey. I think that's a problem with a lot of people. They don't want to describe their whiskey and sound silly. That's totally wrong, because there may be a little bit of a, can we say, snobbery or a little bit of a standard vocabulary that is used maybe in the wine business, but totally, for me, not in the whiskey business. You get a smell in there, say it as you see it. I judge in some of the whiskey competitions, like the International Spirits Challenge, for example, which is judged by a panel of blenders, all blenders, and you want to be in the room whenever we're doing the tastings there, and some of these blenders are describing things that probably is not repeatable on here.
Don?
To build on Billy, I agree. When I go out with my family and friends, I'm terrible. Oh, I smell this, I smell that. Pick it up. I ruin it for them sometimes, but yeah, it's just recognizing smell, childhood memories. For me, with an analytical chemistry background, a lot of the major things we do measure in our whiskey, I've diluted them down and isolated them and recognized them that way. So I've trained myself a little bit from that point of view as well, from a molecular side. Yeah, the flavor wheel put up there. Yeah, so I've got all those chemicals, so that helps too. I will say nosing and flavor and tasting is probably the most important test we will do. And I'll always say it's like eye color. You're given the gifts you're given. There are certain things that'll be dead to you, and there are certain things that you're very sensitive to. And I could go through that whiskey wheel, and I can tell you I can pick up things so quickly, and I'm very good at sulfur notes and diacetyl notes, as those are negatives, that sort of thing. But on the other side of things, I can't smell the whiskey lactones, coconut. I can't smell coconut, and I'm in charge of making Malibu rum. So there you go. But I'm blind to it. I'm really, as much as I can try, I can't. So it becomes a team effort. We do test our people and our panels. When we think there's an issue, we'll call on those people to say, can you smell this or not? And it is a team when it comes to nosing. There's some things, as much as you want to try, you can't get. And there's certain things you can absolutely get. So I'm not a big fan of doing the tasting notes, because it's hard for me to tell you what you can smell. I'm more about, I smell this, I can tell you where it comes from. And that's how my approach when I do the tasting notes.
Stephanie?
Yeah, I mean, I firmly believe that everybody has the ability to perceive aromas. And some are better at describing what they're perceiving than others. And that is the hardest part of, assessing whiskey, is finding the words. And as Billy said, if you go into the supermarket or the market, pick up the strawberries, smell the herbs, and a lot of the things that we perceive start in childhood. So it might be a woodland walk, the smell of the earth underneath your feet, the leaves, the flowers. These are all things that build up our sensory memory. And it means then that we can then convey to our consumers, what it is that we're trying to achieve in the whiskies that we're making. But I always tell people, compare two whiskies. Don't just try one, but buy a couple and compare and contrast. So compare a Scotch whiskey with an Irish whiskey and a Canadian whiskey and an American whiskey, and just take in the differences between them. And that helps build up your ability to discriminate between the different types of aromas. So it's such an exciting journey, and you really just have to keep practicing. That's the key.
We have one final question from the Irish Whiskey Society, and this brings up a point that Don was talking about. Who on the team comes up with the final tasting notes that go on the bottle or in the media kit or in whatever? Does the master blender have the final sign-off? So who gets to decide what actually goes on the back label if you're putting tasting notes on there, or in the press kit or whatever, the official tasting notes? Who's writing them? Is it you for your whiskeys? Do you delegate it? Is it a committee thing? Who decides? Stephanie, you first.
Yeah, I write all the tasting notes. It is great fun, but it can be quite challenging at times. When we brought out the last great malts and all the Altmore expressions, trying to think up a different way to describe smooth, for example. How do you convey that without actually saying the word smooth? So it is a constant challenge, and some blenders are better at it than others. I often wish that I'd done some sort of creative writing course at university, because a lot of what I do is writing these tasting notes and trying to come up with something that's different. So yep, it's me.
Don?
We're the same, Stephanie. It ultimately lands on our shoulders, but I make sure that Scott and Natalie, the two blenders are working with us, are certainly involved with the process, because we want to make sure that transitions for the future for the tasting notes. And we've got it down to, because we use so many components in the blending, that each component we kind of have a tasting note. So we'll try to use the same language. If we know if a lot 40 was going into something else, we'll use kind of the similar tasting notes. So when consumers do pick up our product, they can kind of expect to see what's in that. So it's trying to maintain that consistency as well, to build on what Stephanie has said. Is it does fall on for us, at least at Hiram Walker, the master blender's shoulders, but the consistency, I think, is key long term.
Billy?
Yeah, pretty much the same. Most of the notes that you'll see on the bottles are mine. But again, it doesn't come naturally to me. In fact, yesterday I was asked to write 15 words, just a brief summary to put on the label, a few descriptors, and it took about half a day over it. It doesn't come naturally to me. I have to be in the right frame of mind to do it as well. So don't come to me and ask me, there's a bottle, write your tasting notes on it. Leave it with me. It may be a week, it may be a fortnight, but you'll get them. it goes, they'll go back to the marketing people. They'll have a read over it. It might have to go to legal as well. Just, yeah.
Oh, one of the
Between
lawyers. Oh, come on.
But yeah, basically it's down to me.
Okay, so that brings up, I'm going to ask this one final question. Then I said that was the last one, but I'm going to change this. What is the strangest note that you have ever put on a whiskey? Because we're all familiar with the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society's rather unusual tasting notes, and they've described things as like a rubber scuba wetsuit and things like that. What's the strangest tasting note that you've put on a bottle that somebody would go, what the hell were they thinking? Don.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if there's a strange tasting note that I've put on a bottle that or a description.
No
I can't think what maybe
like that or mustiness.
Musty, the geosmin characteristic. Yeah, that probably won't go on a tasting note because that won't make it into a bottle. I don't know. One of the things that the predecessor for me, he when he made tasting notes, you could tell the days he was doing it was very flowery, unusual terms, and walking through a forest and things. He was going kind of way out there with those things. In the last few years, I tried to shorten them down to make them a little more concise and like I said, consistency on what we're doing. So probably walking through the forest kind of thing. I know I was probably part of that, and he ultimately wrote it down kind of thing. But that's what we put with our Wiser's 18 year actually that's the one I'm thinking about. So that's probably the most strange one that I've been involved with.
Stephanie?
I can't think of the strangest thing I've ever put on a label, but there is something about though our experiences when we're doing tasting notes, and something that we need to watch out for. I remember doing a tasting to North American golf club managers in St Andrews many years ago, and it was organized by a friend of ours, David Roy. And I started talking about sultanas as being one of the flavor notes of this whiskey. And everybody in the audience looked at me in a really confused manner and I said, is everything okay? And they said, what on earth are sultanas? And I, I just thought that was something that everybody knew about. And so that taught me a valuable lesson, is that you have to be careful of your audience. So, sometimes if I'm in a different country, I'll ask people for what they are getting from the whiskey, so that I can then use that at a later date if I'm speaking to that audience.
Billy?
Yeah, kind of can relate to Stephanie there, but I think the most difficult one that I had as a descriptor, I mentioned the Method and Madness cherry cask finish. We had difficulty toning down some of the aromas in the cherry cask finish, and there was a distinct green woody note there. Now I quite liked it, but it was totally different from anything that we had worked with before. In fact, some of the guys said, should we go ahead with this one? Thankfully we did. But and going back to what I mentioned earlier, just triggering memories in your head that it was just walking past a hedge that had been clipped, and to me it was just box hedge clippings, and that went on to the tasting notes.
I think the one that I got yelled at from upstairs about a while back was, I would refer to something as having, say, like a driftwood campfire smoke. And I would get these shouts from upstairs as I was recording the podcast, and they'd say, when have you ever smelled driftwood campfire smoke? And I'm going, in Scotland, Ireland, yes. On the beach, yes. I've smelled driftwood campfire smoke. So, but that said, hey, guys, we've gone an hour and a half, and I've taken far more of your time than was really than we could have ever hoped for. Thank you, all three of you, for doing this. Stephanie Macleod from Dewar's, Billy Leighton from Irish Distillers, Dr. Don Livermore from the Hiram Walker Distillery and Corby Spirit and Wine in Canada. I hope you've had fun doing this. I know I have. And thank you all for doing this so much. I really appreciate it. Let me say just a couple of quick final parting thoughts here just to close things out. I hope you will join us this weekend for our regular edition of WhiskyCast. One of the things we are going to have is an interview with Fawn Weaver from Uncle Nearest Tennessee Whiskey. We've talked a lot over the last 2 weeks about distilleries that are doing hand sanitizers and all sorts of things to help out. Fawn did something a little bit different. She heard about members of their whiskey community online who were working in hospitals and first responder units and places like police and fire departments who did not have the proper personal protective equipment, the PPEs that we keep hearing about in the news. So she worked some contacts through her community and started writing some pretty big checks to buy the actual PPEs and donate it to the hospitals and the first responders with people who were following them online. She said, basically, she told me the other day, send me a copy of your badge or your business card that shows the address, and we're going to send you the stuff. And so they've sent out thousands of dollars worth of PPEs to hospitals and first responders that are affected by this. So that'll be one of the interviews you'll hear on this weekend's WhiskyCast. I hope you'll join us for our next live webcast on Wednesday. We will have a fun bourbon tasting panel with the guys from the Off Track podcast. Their Twitter handle is Ask Off Track, which is where that came from. It's a racing podcast. If you know about my love for motorsports and especially the Indy 500, you're going to love this one because we have James Hinchcliffe and Alexander Rossi, two of the IndyCar drivers in the paddock. Alexander won the 2016 Indianapolis 500. Along with the producer for Off Track, Tim Durham. They're going to join me, and we're going to do a live tasting of 4 different bourbons. Turns out the guys are part of a bourbon tasting club that are made up of members of the IndyCar paddock, so this is going to be a fun experience, and I hope you will join us for that one. We'll also have another live happy hour webcast next Friday night with a panel of whiskey writers and podcasters. I hope you'll join us. Until then, we want to raise our glasses one last time to all of the first responders, all of the healthcare workers, everybody who is risking their lives to help us get through this pandemic. We will get through it one way or the other, and we will come out of this better, happier, and hopefully more congenial and more respectful of the differences that have separated us all and polarized us all. I hope you have a great weekend. I hope you stay safe, stay healthy, and above all else, stay home. Plancha, I'm Mark Gillespie, and have a great weekend.
Flange.
Cheers, Mark.